welcome to Magers Quinn. My name is Sarah and I'm one of the booksellers here. I am so pleased you're joining us to celebrate Oni Sangoyomi's book, Masquerade. A few housekeeping things before we get on with the show tonight. You will hear from Oyin in conversation with Gabi Burton. Then there will be a time at the end of the program for audience questions. After Q&A, please allow the authors to move to the signing counter, which is the glass display case you pass on the way into the store. You may line up there, say hello, and get a signed copy of the book tonight, or books. If you buy a book here this evening, you are not only supporting the author, but also a locally owned independent bookstore, and we cannot thank you enough. Finally, please allow me to introduce our guest. Oyin Sangoyomi is a Nigerian-American author with a penchant for African mythology and history. During a childhood of constantly moving around within the U.S., she found an anchored home in the fictional worlds of books. Sangoyomi is a graduate of Princeton University, where she studied English and African American Studies. Masquerade is her debut novel. Gabi Burton grew up reading and writing in St. Louis, Missouri. She is the author of Sing Me to Sleep, and the sequel, Drown Me with Dreams, which comes out this August if you'd like to pre-order a copy. She graduated from Bowdoin College, in Brunswick, Maine in 2021. Now she works as a paralegal and author on the East Coast. When she's not working or writing, she's probably watching Netflix, scrolling through Twitter, or finding beautiful places to walk, preferably near the water. Please join me in welcoming Oyin Sangoyomi and Gabi Burton.
Thank you. That was a warm introduction. So I'm just going to read the first scene of Masquerade first, and then we can get started with the conversation. Each day, countless fleets of camel caravans sailed across the desert sea to reach Timbuktu. Here, in this port city on the southern edge of the Sahara, waves of men, women, and children flooded the market, searching for supplies. Farmers and craftsmen proudly showcased their wares from behind wooden stands or in front of tents. Threads of dancers wove through cheerful crowds. Juggling entertainers could be found on every corner. Travelers' stories of far-off lands rose and fell with the playful chords of musicians. Vibrant colors and savory scents swirled in the air as Timbuktu teemed with the trading, buying, and selling of everything from exotic spices to brilliant fabrics to precious salt and gold. But today, Timbuktu was still. I stood in front of a wooden platform, along with what felt like half the market goers. Rain poured from the skies, soaking through my brown wrapper. Thunder rumbled as a Songhay general was dragged onto the platform by soldiers who were not his own. They forced the general to his knees, the wood beneath him groaning over the incessant patter of rain. His wet robes were stained with blood and grime. Water trickled from his turban, down his bruised face. A third, smaller man drifted onto the platform. Lines were etched into his face like ripples in a shadow. Each line marked a history, a birth, a marriage, a death. He frowned as his gaze swept over the crowd, chronicling yet another wrinkle, another event. He extended his arms on either side of him, and in his billowing sleeves crowded around his elbows. Obaki Pokori. The customary introduction of griots pierced the air. The griot paused, allowing his baritone words to take their place among the crowd before continuing in accented Arabic. Gather, gather, hear me now. The Songhay Empire rules this city no more. As of today, Timbuktu belongs to the Latin of Yoruba land. The griot gestured to a group of soldiers standing nearby. From within their circle, an old man stepped forward. He wore a red and white kente toga that draped over one of his forearms and shoulders. Beneath the painted white dots covering his body, his skin was as brown and gnarled as an ancient baobab tree. It felt as though time itself paused to accommodate his slow approach. The griot stepped back as the old man mounted the platform. Griots represented nobles and the people, but divine correspondence with the Orishas was left to Babalawos. The Babalawo looked down at the general and raised a fist. Slowly, very slowly, he uncurled his fingers, uncovering a single cowpea in the center of his palm. People around me recoiled. I leaned forward. I had heard of the sacred Yoruba game, but I had never seen one myself. Although the general had not flinched, his full lips were thin. From where I stood at the front of the crowd, I saw the fear that flashed across his eyes. He struggled in vain as soldiers pried open his jaw and the Babalawo forced him to eat the cowpea. Great Shango, the Babalawo cried. His gossamer voice swirled around me as though entwined in the wind. This is the man who led your enemies. What is to be his fate? There was no answer, of course. The Orishas never personally descended from the heavens to speak to the humans they presided over. Wind howled around us, growing crueler in its acceleration. Roots were blown off nearby stands. Orange sand surged forth. As I shielded my face from the storm, I wondered if all of Timbuktu would be uprooted before the trial ended. Then lightning ruptured the sky, and the world shuddered under the thunder that followed. Shango has spoken, the griot boomed. He beckoned a soldier forward. Rage rippled through the fear on the general's face. This is what you call justice? You Yoruba are nothing but a tribe of superstitious pagans. The soldier plunged a spear into the side of the general's neck. His declaration sputtered into wet gurgling as blood poured from the wound. He fell onto the platform, seizing until his movements gradually came to a stop. The Babalawo raised his arms to the sky. Sangoyomi. Sangoyomi, the crowd echoed. Shango saved me.
That was so beautiful. Oh my gosh. I know that not everyone probably has had a chance to read yet. It just came out last week, so I will avoid spoilers in this discussion. But I also had a chance to pick her brain beforehand for some insider information. Okay, so first I want to know, what inspired you to write Masquerade?
So I wrote Masquerade in my sophomore year of college, and that came out of a kind of frustration I experienced at seeing that there were only British histories available in classes, or European histories, or even histories from like Asia and Latin America, but there were very few histories about Africa, especially pre-colonial Africa. And so that prompted me to want to research more about it, and it kind of became like a project that I did outside of class, where I would read as many works as I could from like explorers that visited the time, that place during that time, and reaching out to Nigerian academics. And the more that I learned about this really rich time period, especially the medieval period in the three great empires of West Africa, the more inspired I became to write this book.
Was there a specific event that you read about that particularly inspired the events of Masquerade?
I think because Masquerade is also a retelling of Hades and Persephone, so I always loved that myth, but I always knew that I wanted to write a retelling of it. I never really saw the myth as romance, as we discussed, but as it became more popular in popular culture, it was largely interpreted as a romance, and that really surprised me, because it always seemed to me more, the focus was how Persephone suddenly became a queen, rather than her relationship with Hades, and I wanted to write a story that focused more on her sudden rise to power. So I had this character that I always wanted to write, and now I had this setting, and then things just kind of came together really well there.
Oh, I love that. Okay. So you just talked about like kind of the romantic elements that you wanted to distance yourself from the Hades and Persephone myth. So I'm curious how you went about incorporating elements of that myth into this story.
It actually worked out pretty well. The focus, I feel like at its core, Masquerade is a book about death, and I got to explore that on multiple themes. There is, of course, with the Hades, he's god of the underworld, and he oversees the dead. And in the king, in the book, the king, who's like the Hades retelling character, he's an undying king of sorts. He has a unique idea of immortality. He has a crown that shields his face, and so no one can tell whether he's his father or like the father who came before him. So to the people, they look like just one consistent ruler. So they have that idea of immortality. And then there are other concepts of death that are explored. There's Adodo's like her autonomy, and as she's rising to power, what parts of herself that she's killing, basically. So I basically just focus on exploring different types of death within this book.
I really loved, in terms of like the exploration of death, the song that she sang to the daffodils. It was so beautiful. And did you write that yourself, or is that like from mythology?
Thank you. No, I did write it.
Oh, that's so impressive. It's so beautiful.
Thank
oh my
you.
gosh.
It was actually like the most painful part about writing this book.
Yeah.
I thought that I could just write a poem and that would be okay, but it never sounded right when I was trying to write a poem. It needed to actually have a rhythm and a melody, and I think that I went through a few hundred drafts of that song. I'm not even exaggerating.
Could you read it?
Yeah, I can.
You don't have to sing it, but
Thank you, because you don't want to hear it. It's just a short thing that repeats throughout the book. You listen to her tale, one her teacher always told, of roads his son walked, roads paved with petals of gold. See them bloom, see them shine, see this garden become a sky with 1,000 tiny suns. It's no lie, it's no lie. Like the world through the night, keep this glow inside your heart. Flowers wilt, lands dwindle, but survival is in the heart.
I love that. And it really does work so well as a motif throughout the book. Each time it comes up, it just really, really contributes to a Dodo story. I love it a lot. Still kind of in the vein of Hades and Persephone, you mentioned, or while you were reading, the cowpea came up, which was in the book. It has like a very similar function to like the pomegranate seeds from the story of Hades and Persephone. So does the cowpea have actual cultural significance, or is that something that you wrote into the story intentionally just as a mirror to Hades and Persephone?
It's actually true. I actually feel like for this story, I didn't really make up many things. I drew a lot on Yoruba culture and actual West African societies. So with the cowpea thing, that's another thing that kind of just fell into place seamlessly with connecting this to the Hades and Persephone myth. It's followers of Shango, who is like the god of thunder and lightning in Yoruba religion. They believe that eating a cowpea, which is like a bean, will attract the attention of him. And if he's in a bad mood, that could get him struck down by lightning and thunder. And so that functions in the book as being the thing that entraps a dodo in the same way that Persephone was entrapped with the pomegranate seeds.
That's really interesting, because I thought that was like a really interesting concept. Again, I don't want to give away too much to anyone who has not read it yet, but I really did love the way that kind of played out with the cowpea in the moment when she did eat them. So I was really fascinated by all the relationships with the women in this book. I mean, there's Ododo and her mother. There's Kolo, who have very complicated feelings about. And there are a lot of other women, and something that kind of came up a lot was the idea of women forming relationships and then kind of having to, without giving too much away, like betray those relationships in order to maintain power in a very like patriarchal system. So I was really curious about like how that you think like reflects in like this world, or like what you wanted to say with that, because I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, actually, the way that I look at it, I feel like none of the female characters in this book are truly villains. I know there's Mama Laughing, the mother of Ododo's future husband, who really antagonizes Ododo throughout the story. And there's Kolo, who we find out has her own motivations and was kind of just using Ododo. But the thing is, all of these women, they are living in the same world, which is one where they're oppressed under men. And they're all just kind of doing what they need to do to survive. So like Mama Laughing, her source of comfort in this world is her son. And when you look at it from her perspective, of course she's going to do what it takes to protect her relationship with her son, because otherwise she doesn't have a place in this world. And with Kolo, she's working for a man. I can't, like, this is a spoiler, so she's it's not her own like what she wants. She's doing what a man is commanding her to do. So even then, you can't really blame her. And I feel like I just have a lot of sympathy for these women, despite them. It kind of poses the questions like, are they actually villains, and can a woman be a villain under the patriarchy?
Yeah. I really loved, this came up a few times in the book too, how like each woman is like defined by her like relationship to a man. And something that Ododo really struggles with is like, okay, I went from being a daughter to a wife, you know, and they expect me to become a mother, and that's kind of my purpose in the world. So I guess it to me like kind of raises the question for each of them, like how could they be villains if all they are is like, you know, the property of someone else, of so yeah, I really liked that theme a lot. So the relationship between a dodo and her mother, I love a lot. But there's a love between them that's like rooted in kind of resentment and kind of bitterness for both of them. And I'm curious if you think that like all of the mother-daughter relationships, we don't see a lot of them in this world, would be similar to theirs.
That's interesting. I think it wouldn't be exactly the same because there were, you know, unique circumstances. Akobi did not want to have a dodo, and she was kind of forced to do that. But I do think all of the mother-daughter relationships would be complicated in the sense that the mother is knowingly kind of bringing another victim into this world, and that she has to prepare her daughter for what she faced. And we actually see a dodo struggle with this temporarily, like some point in the book when she thinks about what it would be like to have a daughter versus a son. She finds a lot of comfort in having a son and knowing that people would love him and take care of him, but she thinks that if she had a daughter, the daughter would be better off dead, honestly, because she doesn't want her daughter to go through what she's gone through. So it's kind of like that tension between mother and daughter, that how do you prepare your daughter for this world.
And this book obviously takes place in a specific setting that's not this world, but do you think that their relationship would be, if like the circumstances were as similar as they could be like in our world, do you think they would have a similar relationship?
Definitely. I don't think that it's limited to the time period, honestly. I think that this has gone on in so many different parts of the world in so many different eras to today. It's still, you know, it's hard to imagine yourself having a daughter, knowing what women are treated like and knowing what she might go through and what you've been through, and thinking about her doing that.
It's interesting because you said earlier that this is a book about death, and I think that's true. And also, you know, this is a book about power, so I'm curious, there might not be like an easy answer to this, but like what do you think, not specifically to a dodo, but probably it will pertain to her, like what do you think has to die in order to like obtain power in a world that like wants to strip you of it?
Honestly, I think to an extent a dodo's humanity had to die. She had to, she was put in really tough decisions where she was faced choosing between herself and people that she genuinely loved. But at the end of the day, if she wanted to survive, she couldn't be empathetic, and she couldn't try to save everyone because she barely had it in her to save herself, really.
Yeah.
So I think it comes with, you know, she had to kind of become a monster to survive in a world of monsters.
Did you have a favorite character or a favorite character to write as you were writing Masquerade?
I did. I think that Aremo was actually really interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah. he was fun. Aremo is the love interest, the Hades character. I feel like he's really simple in a way that makes him complex. He's very charming, and he says a lot of pretty words.
Yeah.
But then he also does these really terrible things, and it's never a facade that drops. He's still very charming as he's committing these literal war crimes and these atrocities against Dodo herself too. And it's kind of paradoxical to have a character that's so socially likable but morally terrible, because you kind of want them to be better. Like you see something good in them and you want that to, you know, take over, but they'll never change. She never changes throughout the book, and that's what a dodo, I think, has to realize, that if she wants true power, then she can't keep being under this man, even if he says has like her best interest in mind. Really, he does the same thing that she learns how to do, which is put himself first.
Yeah. We were talking about this earlier, but he is a very like simple-minded character, but at the same time, like, very conniving. And it's, like, such a fascinating, like, juxtaposition, I feel like, with his character.
Because it's not even intentional. He
Yeah.
doesn't even know that he's manipulating people. This is just how he's been raised to act.
And it makes sense when you, like, see his mother and just kind of the world that he's in, how much power he's been given. He's what, 25?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's young.
Yeah. And he's the king of kings. Like, I mean, yeah. It's funny, that's interesting that he was your favorite character to write, because I
don't like him, to clarify. But he was interesting to write.
No, I feel that. I do think the scenes that he's in, even if you're like, God, shut up, you know, it's still, like, fun to read about him, and he makes everything more entertaining, even though I did want to strangle him.
Since the beginning.
Yeah. I was trying to think, maybe, no, yeah, from the beginning, I did want to strangle him. Okay, yeah, this is also still talking about Aremo. So he has this thing where he conquers for the sake of conquering, like, just for fun. And, I was curious, like, what you think it says about him and the society that just, like, enables him, because no one ever challenges him on that. And I think it's really interesting because he is very young, he is commanding a lot of people older than him, and no one ever questions his wisdom ever. And so if he's like, yeah, I want to go, I literally want to go commit genocide because I want to see the ocean just for fun, and I think that's wild, and no one says anything.
There is one person who kind of says something. There's Rotimi.
He's my favorite. He is my favorite.
Yeah. He kind of pushes back. Of course, it's not really for the right reasons.
Yeah.
He wants to, so right now in this book, you're abolished the empire that they're in. It's a warrior society. But there's this character, Rotimi, who advocates for stopping expansion and trying to shift to a merchant society. He does that for profit. That's why he wants it. But I think that in terms of Aremo just kind of committing these atrocities because he can, I think that's a really interesting concept. I kind of, it's become so common for villains to have like this really expansive origin story and these expansive motives. But what about people who are just want to do bad things for no reason? And I like this because it teaches a dodo that she can have what she wants and she doesn't need a reason for that. And I think that's something that's so rare in women particularly, that they always need to, be thinking about maybe their families, their parents, their children. But a dodo learns through him that she can be selfish, like a man, basically.
Yeah. I do think, I'm curious if you agree, like, I don't think this is a book that has, like, a villain. I think this is a book with all of the characters are very deeply flawed. I don't know that I would call any of them explicitly a villain, I'm thinking. Would you call any of them a villain?
I would call them more so selfish.
Yeah.
And then that, of course, clashes with each other. And I feel like, especially with Bowman, again, that's what makes them so interesting, that none of them can truly be called villains when they're just doing, what they need to do to survive.
And in that same vein, not to put you on the spot, but are any of these characters based off people in your real life?
No.
That's a relief. I'm really glad to hear that. Okay, good.
So I will say, like, the women's struggles, that is definitely something that's universal. I feel like that, how they have to learn how to have their place in the world and to have a relationship, to basically have their identity, hold that onto that while still being like mothers and wives. But in terms of like the characters themselves, no. Thank goodness.
Yeah, I did really enjoy all of the characters, but enjoy in the sense that they are fascinating, not enjoy in the sense that I would ever want to meet them ever. I already know the answer to this, but for everyone here, can we expect a sequel?
So Masquerade is a standalone novel. I really enjoy novels that have a, strong beginning, middle, and end. But I am working on another medieval West African book. It is set in a different place, and it incorporates more West African folklore and myth, and it follows a hunter and her journey to becoming a hunter.
So then I was curious about, or wanted to talk more about, like, the genre of Masquerade. So how would you describe the genre of this book?
I would call Masquerade an alternate history novel, and that does fall under the rung of speculative fiction. But I think the problem that I've been encountering is that many people consider speculative fiction just strictly sci-fi or fantasy. But it's really a really umbrella term that kind of just anything that proposes an alternate reality to the world as we know it. It doesn't have to be as extreme as magic.
Yeah.
So Masquerade, it's based off of some medieval West African empires, and it kind of combines many different elements of those empires, but it's still all very much rooted in history. And I think that's important to acknowledge. I really wanted to write an African novel that's set in the real world because I wanted, to show Africa as a real place. I think Afro fantasy is great, but it also kind of gives the impression that Africa only can exist in fantastical settings, but I really wanted to highlight the real history that it had.
I loved the depictions of, like, opulence in this world. Like, they were so fascinating to read about. So, like, when you were researching, what kinds of like cultures were those specific customs like mimicking?
It was actually Yoruba culture. That's my Nigerian tribe. That didn't come from research, the opulence. That came from my own observations. Because, like, when you go to Nigerian weddings, it's like 500 people. And I think in American weddings, there's a thing where you can't outdress the bride. But Nigerian weddings, it's the opposite.
I've been on that side of TikTok.
Yeah. It's a fashion show. It's up to the bride to not be outdressed. That's embarrassing for her. And I really wanted to highlight that because I think that so often Africa and Western media is showed as just like, huts and very primitive. But the Nigeria that I know, we really take so much pride in appearances and, just clothes and jewelry, and it's really beautiful. And I wanted to show that Africa can have that opulence too, and it did actually especially in this time period when it was just flooded with so much gold.
Yeah. I really love those descriptions. I mean, they were like always dressed to the nine throughout the entire book. I was like, oh my god. I mean, after what, the second chapter? Yeah, they were like dressed up the whole time, and I did really love reading about those descriptions. Okay, also the food. I loved the food descriptions so much. So was there like a favorite meal that like any of them were like modeled after? Like, I don't know. I just loved all the descriptions of food so much.
Yeah, that was also important to me because I also love Nigerian food. I also wanted to highlight there's just so many different dishes too that I think, it would be nice to highlight. So that's where that came from.
Okay, zooming out a little bit, can you like tell us a little bit about your road to publication? How did Masquerade come to be?
Yeah, so like I said, I wrote Masquerade in my sophomore year of college, and that came, so basically the idea came to me in the summer after freshman year. But how I do it, it's kind of like I let ideas stew a little bit before I act on them. So I thought about it the whole summer. I didn't write anything down. I just let the idea develop. And when it didn't leave me alone and it only got stronger, that's when I was like, I want to see what this could be. And so that's, I was also reading like pre-colonial African material. So I focused more on West Africa because that's where my family is from. So that's my particular interest. And I did like research and outlining throughout the first semester of sophomore year so that once winter break came, I could just write. And that's what I did. Princeton has like a really long winter break. It was like 6 weeks. So I planned to have the first draft done by the new semester, and that's what happened. And I spent like a month or so revising, and we discussed this. I didn't know anything about beta readers or anything. So I was like, this is good to go. And I sent it out to agents. And I wasn't wrong. I did, about 5 months later, hear back from an agent who liked it. And saying it now, that sounds like, it's pretty good. But at the time, it was really frustrating to see all the rejections because no one really had actionable feedback. It was kind of like, I love this, but I don't know what to do with it. Because we talked about, like, this is a bit hard to place in genre. You know, people, when they hear Africa now, they expect fantasy, but this is historical fiction, but it also has plot-wise mythology retelling. So it was kind of hard on the business side. But finally, I found an agent who was willing to work with me on this, and then we revised a little bit. We sent it out to publishers, and we heard the same thing. I love this, but I don't know what to do with it. And so that's when we decided to kind of make Masquerade more squarely one genre, and we grounded it more in history, and we focused more on history imprints rather than fantasy imprints. And then that's when it got picked up.
I love that story. It's amazing. For anyone who is unfamiliar with publishing, 5 months in the prairie trenches when it has not been beta read is insane. That is insane. So
it's good that I didn't know anything about publishing though, because then I would have been too scared and I would have tried to, go through all the proper steps. But it's good to not go through the proper steps.
The more you know about publishing, the more you hate publishing. So it was good. It's good.
And then you psych yourself out, I think.
Totally. So for the title, at what stage did you come up with the title, Masquerade?
The title, I think that came near the end.
Mm-hmm.
I usually need to know the story, start writing it before I figure out the title. And I just, towards the end, I realized that, that this, at its core, I really want this to be a book about death, not just in the book, but also the topic of the book itself in terms of these histories aren't getting spoken about anymore. And that's kind of death of a culture, and I wanted Masquerade to fight against that. So I came up with Masquerade because there's this Yoruba ritual kind of. It's called Egungun, that means masquerade, and it's this festival where it's supposed to be a bond between the living and the dead and kind of bring those two worlds closer together. So I feel like that encompasses what I'm trying to do with this book, kind of trying to highlight these histories and, prevent them from dying completely.
I love the cover, and I love how the more you read, the more I'm oh, okay, I know what that's from. I know what that's from. So I was curious about the process for getting your cover and how much of a hand you had in that.
I gave the cover artist a sketch that was really, really bad.
Oh, you sketched?
No, not this.
Oh, it was raw?
It was the sketch that I gave had flowers, and then I was there needs to be an elephant somewhere. And then she made this from that. So she's really talented. And I'm really happy with the outcome. I feel like it encompasses a lot of the themes. There's the daffodil, which is that song that I read earlier. That's the daffodil being saved from death through that song because we're talking about the daffodil. And then there's the elephant. There's in the book, the king's emblem, he has a 3-headed elephant. And one's looking to the past, one's to the present, one's to the future, encompassing all those time periods, so that's kind of represented there. And there's, of course, the dodo, looking very angry, which I think encompasses her character, too.
Definitely. She is an angry character, and I love it so much. I feel like in the beginning, she has absolutely no idea what's going on. Hades Persephone, she's just been, picked up, dropped off in a totally different location. She has no idea what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think normal people would be confused, and she is, but she's so hostile, and I love it so much. Because just right off the bat, she's I don't know what I'm doing here, but all of you are weird. And I love that. So those were all of my questions. I think we can open it up to audience questions if anyone has any, or we can just keep chatting, because that's fine with me too.
Maybe we can follow up on the Hades and Persephone, who I'm an old person, so I've heard of those people, but I don't know that story. Do I need to know that story before, or would it be better that I not read that story before I read this story?
I think, so you don't need to know the story.
Okay.
I like to do retellings that they take on a story of their own. It's kind of just people who are familiar with that story, they might, enjoy seeing those little things hidden throughout the story, but it really is quite separate from that myth.
Is that a Greek myth?
It's, Greek mythology.
Okay, I'll take that advice. I'll read it first and then go back to read that story.
Yeah, I will say I went into this book with no knowledge aside from the fact that it was like an African Hades and Persephone retelling, and so
Okay.
I had like a very different idea of like what the book would be about. And so yeah, it was very different from what I expected. So I definitely don't think you need to like
Okay,
have
good.
that myth in mind at all.
I'm really glad you wrote the story. I read a lot of African, in particular, young adult, because it takes me out of my own professional work. And I came in here last weekend very specifically looking for a book that was not that was not African young, and the person here was like this, and then oh my gosh, she's coming. That's not here. And so I'm really excited to read it, and thank you for writing it.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Joyce. I really
I already have your book. I'm one of those people on Google Reads. It's like part 2.
Next
so
month.
It's great to see both of you. I'm proud of both of you.
Thank you.
So you said that the first draft you wrote in like 6 weeks.
Yeah.
That's
So
insane.
I was curious if like the whole time you kind of like had like the whole idea of like where things were going, or if there were any like interesting or surprising like shifts of direction during the writing process.
Definitely, I think the reason why I was able to write so quickly was because I had it planned out really, really detailed. Like my outline was 50 pages long.
Okay.
Yeah. So even though I drafted in 6 weeks, I had spent the past few months researching and outlining and also making like character sheets and location sheets. So I could just get started.
Nice. Is there any bit of your research that didn't make it into the book?
Yeah, it's so sad because like there was so many interesting things that I found, but if I found like 100 things, then I feel like only 10 made it into the book, because the thing about writing historical fiction is I can't just be a history book.
Yeah.
I have to give, things actually related to the plot and pare down my research to fit that.
Was there one thing in particular that was the hardest to leave out?
There was something that I tried to incorporate, but it just didn't fit. Fun fact, guys. In medieval West Africa, we mentioned how it was like so flooded with gold at this time, and so people were really protective of their gold mines because that was their source of income. And so the process for obtaining that gold and getting it into the market was actually pretty complicated. So what would happen was the miners and the traders, they would have like an agreed upon spot in the forest somewhere. And then the miners, they would take the agreed amount of gold to there, and then they would bang a drum to signal that they had left the gold. And then the trader had to give the miner some time to like go back so that he wasn't followed. So then the trader would come and get the gold and bang the drum to signal that he got the gold, and then that's how the trader got the gold. So no one knew where gold mines were. It was all very secretive.
Interesting.
It is interesting. It didn't make it into the book, but that's like my fun.
In the
In the next book.
that is a fun fact I love that.
Also on the research bent, did you have a hard time, because clearly you're super passionate about the history and the research side of things and engaging with it intellectually. Did you have a hard time switching from the like intellectual appreciation to like story mode, or was it pretty?
Yeah, I think that's what I learned, that it's, very different to just write about history and then to write historical fiction specifically. Especially because, I'm very aware that this book is catered to Western readers who won't have as much knowledge about Nigerian culture. And so I had to kind of like get in the mindset of someone who doesn't know anything about not just these histories but also this culture, and find ways to kind of explain things but without explaining things throughout the story. I think that was the hardest part.
I didn't notice until the end that there was a glossary, and I was like, oh, I should have been using it. But honestly, I will say, I still find it very accessible. I know very little about Nigerian culture, and I feel like I learned a lot. And like I was just kind of enjoying the story, and I feel like a lot of it you can, figure out through context. But at the end, I was like, oh, that would have been nice to have noticed before.
I was wondering, because when you were talking about the reason for writing the book, some of it was a gap in what you were accessing at school and what was available and what was being taught. What drew you to making a fictionalized account instead of writing straight history?
Well, actually, I've been a writer for my whole life. I've always written fiction. And so whenever I find something cool, my first instinct is always like, how can I make a story about this? So it just came naturally to me that when I came upon this world that I wanted to spread the word about it, but not so directly. I knew that I wanted to make this a story and another novel that I could write. Any more questions?
Alright. Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.